The heat shimmered off the dusty main street of Cody, Wyoming, on that blistering August afternoon in 1883. And Ryder Nichols had just finished loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the sickening thud of a body hitting the wooden planks of the boardwalk outside Henderson's general store. He spun around, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip before he registered what he was seeing. A woman lay crumpled on the weathered boards, her faded blue calico dress spread around her like wilted petals. One arm stretched out as though she had tried to catch herself before consciousness left her entirely. A burlap sack of what looked like flour had spilled beside her, white powder dusting the air and settling on her dark hair like premature snow. Ryder dropped the rope he had been tying and sprinted across the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each stride. Several townspeople had already begun to gather, forming a hesitant circle around the fallen woman, but nobody had moved to help her yet. That was the way of things in small frontier towns sometimes, people waiting for someone else to take responsibility, to make the first move that might bind them to a stranger's troubles. He pushed through the small crowd and dropped to one knee beside her, his calloused hand reaching out to check the pulse at her throat. Her skin was burning hot beneath his fingers, and he could feel her heartbeat fluttering rapidly like a trapped bird. She was young, probably not more than 22 or 23, with delicate features now slack with unconsciousness. Her lips were cracked and dry, and even in her senseless state, her brow was furrowed as though she were fighting some invisible battle. "Somebody get Doc Patterson," Ryder barked over his shoulder, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to making decisions quickly. "Tell him it's urgent." "Doc's over at the Miller place delivering a baby," old Mr. Henderson called from the doorway of his store, wringing his hands anxiously. "Won't be back for hours likely." Ryder cursed under his breath and made his decision in the span of a heartbeat. He slid one arm beneath the woman's shoulders and the other under her knees, lifting her as carefully as he could manage. She weighed almost nothing, he noticed with concern, far too light for someone her height. When had she last eaten a proper meal? He could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. "Where are you taking her?" Mrs. Calloway asked, her hand pressed to her ample chest in concern. "Doc's office. He'll have to tend to her when he gets back, and she needs to be somewhere cool until then." Ryder adjusted his grip, cradling the unconscious woman against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the unnatural heat radiating from her body, even through his cotton shirt. The walk to Doc Patterson's office was only 3 blocks, but it felt like 3 miles under the merciless afternoon sun. Ryder's arms began to ache, not from the woman's weight but from the tension of trying to keep her as steady as possible, to avoid jostling her any more than necessary. Sweat dripped down his back and soaked through his shirt, but he kept his pace steady and sure. Doc Patterson's office occupied the ground floor of a 2-story building at the edge of town, with the doctor's living quarters upstairs. The door was locked, as Ryder had expected, but he had seen the doc hide a spare key under a loose board on the porch often enough. He managed to retrieve it without setting the woman down, though it took some awkward maneuvering, and soon had the door swung open into the blessedly cooler interior. The examination room smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs, familiar scents that Ryder associated with the handful of times he had needed the doctor's services over the years. He carried the woman through to the small room in the back where Doc Patterson kept a cot for patients who needed observation, and he laid her down as gently as he could manage. Up close, in the dimmer light of the room, he could see more details that worried him. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her cheekbones stood out too prominently. Her hands, when he examined them, showed signs of hard work, the skin rough and the nails broken short. This was no pampered town lady who had simply swooned from the heat and her corset being laced too tight. Ryder found a basin and filled it with water from the pump in the back room, then grabbed several clean cloths from Doc Patterson's neatly organized supply cabinet. He had seen heat exhaustion before, had treated it in his ranch hands during the brutal summer months when they were working cattle under the unforgiving Wyoming sun. The key was to cool the person down gradually and get fluids into them as soon as they could swallow. He dipped one of the cloths in the cool water, wrung it out, and began to carefully wipe her face and neck. The cloth came away dirty, streaked with dust and sweat. How long had she been out in that heat? Where had she come from? Cody was not so large that he did not recognize most of the faces in town, and he was certain he had never seen this woman before. As he worked, bathing her flushed skin with the cool water, he found himself studying her features with more attention than was probably proper. She had a stubborn chin and a straight nose, and even in her current state, there was something resolute about her expression. Her dark hair, once he had wiped away the flour dust, showed hints of auburn when the light caught it. She wore no wedding ring, he noticed, though that did not necessarily mean anything. Many frontier women could not afford such luxuries. An hour passed, then two. Ryder kept up his vigil, changing the water when it grew warm, continuing to bathe her face and arms and throat. He loosened the top buttons of her dress to help her breathe easier and to cool her more effectively, careful to preserve her modesty. The sun moved across the sky, sending shafts of golden light through the room's single window, and still the woman did not wake. Ryder found himself talking to her, his voice low and steady in the quiet room. He told her about his ranch, about the string of horses he was breaking, about the new foal that had been born just last week with a star-shaped blaze on her forehead. He told her about the summer storms that rolled over the mountains and how the grass turned gold in the autumn light. He was not sure why he talked to her, only that the silence felt too heavy, too fraught with worry. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, he heard footsteps on the porch and then Doc Patterson's voice calling out, "Hello? Who's in my office?" "It's Ryder Nichols, Doc. I've got a patient for you." Doc Patterson appeared in the doorway, a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually rumpled appearance. He took in the scene with a single comprehensive glance and moved immediately to the woman's side, his medical bag already in his hand. "What happened?" he asked, even as his fingers found her pulse and his other hand pressed against her forehead. "Collapsed outside Henderson's store, must have been around 2 o'clock. I brought her straight here. She's been unconscious the whole time. I have been trying to cool her down, but her fever has not broken." Doc Patterson nodded approvingly as he examined the basin of water and the damp cloths. "You did right. Heat exhaustion, certainly, but there might be more to it." He pulled back her eyelids one at a time, peering at her pupils, then began a more thorough examination, checking her breathing and listening to her heart with his stethoscope. Ryder stepped back to give the doctor room to work, but he did not leave. He told himself he was simply waiting to hear what Doc Patterson's diagnosis was, that it was only responsible to see this through since he had been the one to bring her here. But the truth was something else entirely, something he could not quite name yet. "She's malnourished," Doc Patterson said after a long examination, his voice grave. "Severely so, and dehydrated. The heat exhaustion was just the final blow. This young woman has been suffering for some time, I would wager." He looked up at Ryder with concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "Do you know who she is? Does she have family in town? Never seen her before today. I was hoping you might know." The doctor shook his head. A stranger, then, that complicates matters. He stood and rolled down his sleeves, which he had pushed up for the examination. She needs rest, proper food when she wakes, and fluids. I will need to keep her here for observation, but I have another call I must make tonight. The widow Hadley's arthritis has been causing her terrible pain, and I promised I would bring her more medicine after I finished at the miller's. I can stay with her, Ryder heard himself offer before he had fully thought it through. Someone should be here in case she wakes. She'll be frightened, waking up in a strange place with no idea how she got here. Doc Patterson studied him for a long moment, and Ryder had the uncomfortable feeling that those sharp eyes saw more than he wanted them to. But finally, the doctor nodded. That would ease my mind considerably. There's coffee in the pot on the stove, should still be warm. And help yourself to anything in the kitchen if you get hungry. I should not be gone more than an hour or two. After the doctor left, giving Ryder detailed instructions on what to do if the woman's condition changed, the office fell silent again except for the soft sound of her breathing. Ryder pulled a chair close to the cot and settled in for the long night ahead. Through the window, he watched the sky turn from gold to rose to deep purple as the sun set behind the mountains. Stars began to prick through the darkening sky, and somewhere down the street, he could hear the tinny sound of a piano from the saloon and the occasional burst of laughter. He should have been back at his ranch. He had left his foreman, Jack, in charge, and Jack was competent enough, but there were always things that needed Ryder's attention. The fence in the north pasture that needed mending, the accounts that needed balancing, the meeting with the cattle buyer that was scheduled for tomorrow. But none of those concerns seemed to carry enough weight to move him from this chair, from this vigil beside a woman whose name he did not even know. Around 9 o'clock, she stirred for the first time. It was just a small movement, her head turning slightly on the pillow, but Ryder sat forward immediately, watching her face intently. Her eyelids fluttered and she made a small sound, something between a moan and a sigh. "Easy now," Ryder said softly, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe. You're in Doc Patterson's office in Cody." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then widening with confusion and a touch of fear as they fixed on his face. They were green, he noticed, a deep green like the pine forests that covered the mountain slopes. "Who are you?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rough and dry. "Name's Ryder Nichols. You collapsed outside the general store this afternoon. I brought you here to the doctor." She tried to sit up, and he saw panic flash across her features. "My things. I had supplies. I need—" "Whoa, hold on there." Ryder gently pressed her shoulder to keep her from rising. "You need to stay put. Doc says you've got heat exhaustion and you're in no shape to be moving around. Your supplies, was it just the flour sack?" She nodded weakly, and he could see tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "I saved for 2 weeks to buy that flour, and now it's gone, spilled all over the street. I'm such a fool." "You're not a fool. You're sick, and don't worry about the flour. I'll sort that out." He had no idea how he would sort it out, but he would figure something out. He could not stand the look of despair on her face. "Right now, you need to drink some water. Can you manage that?" She nodded again, and he helped her sit up enough to take small sips from the cup he held to her lips. She drank eagerly at first, and he had to caution her to slow down, remembering Doc Patterson's warning that too much too fast could make her sick. After she had drunk about half the cup, she lay back against the pillow, exhausted from even that small effort. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her eyes. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you. Couldn't very well leave you lying on the boardwalk now, could I? What's your name?" Willa Kane." "Well, Miss Kane, it's nice to meet you, even under these circumstances. Where are you from?" Do you have family we should contact? Her expression shuddered, and she turned her face away from him. No family. Not anymore. The pain in those few words told Ryder volumes, and he decided not to press. Everyone on the frontier had stories they did not want to tell, losses they did not want to remember. He had his own. "Are you new to Cody?" he asked instead, keeping his tone conversational. "Been here about 3 weeks. I have a homestead claim about 5 miles north of town. Came out from Ohio after my father died. He had always talked about the West, about the opportunities out here. After he passed, there was nothing keeping me back there, so I filed a claim and came out." Ryder felt a mixture of admiration and concern. A woman alone, trying to prove up a homestead claim, was not unheard of, but it was far from easy. The Homestead Act required 160 acres to be cultivated and a dwelling built within 5 years. And that was backbreaking work even for experienced farmers with families to help them. For a woman alone, likely with no experience of frontier farming, it would be nearly impossible. "That's quite an undertaking," he said carefully. "Have you got your cabin built yet?" "It's more of a lean-to at the moment," she admitted, and he could hear embarrassment in her voice. "I'm working on it. I've got the frame up for a proper cabin, but I'm doing it alone, so it's slow going, and I needed to focus on getting crops in before the season was too far gone. I planted late as it was." "What are you growing?" "Vegetables, mostly. Potatoes, carrots, beans, some corn. I brought seeds with me from Ohio. They're coming up, but the soil here is different than back home. Drier. Nothing seems to want to grow the way I expected it to." The frustration in her voice was palpable, and underneath it, he could hear fear. Fear that she had made a terrible mistake, that she had bet everything on a dream that would never materialize. "The soil can be tricky if you don't know how to work with it," Ryder agreed. "And this has been a particularly dry summer. Even experienced ranchers are struggling with their hay crops." They fell silent for a moment, and then Willa spoke again, her voice even quieter than before. "I haven't eaten much in the past week. I ran through my supplies faster than I planned, and I couldn't afford to buy more until I sold some eggs in town. That's what I was doing today, selling eggs and buying flour. But I walked all the way in the heat, and I suppose my body just gave out. Stupid of me." "Not stupid. You were doing what you had to do, but you can't keep going like this, Miss Kane. You'll work yourself to death." "What choice do I have?" There was defiance in her voice now, despite her weakness. "I have no money to hire help. I have no family to turn to. If I lose this claim, I have nothing. I'll have to go back east and try to find work as someone's maid or seamstress, spending the rest of my life paying off debts and never having anything of my own. This land is all I have. It's my only chance." Ryder understood that kind of desperation. He had felt it himself 10 years ago when he had first come to Wyoming with nothing but a borrowed horse and a dream of building something that was his own. He had been 19 then, running from his own set of troubles, and the territory had seemed to offer a kind of salvation. It had taken years of brutal work, near starvation, and more setbacks than he cared to remember, but he had managed to build his ranch into something successful. Not large by some standards, but profitable and growing. "We'll figure something out," he said, though he had no idea what that something might be. "Why would you help me?" Willa's eyes opened and fixed on his face again, searching. "You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." "Maybe that's reason enough. Out here we look after each other. We have to." Before she could respond, Doc Patterson returned, bustling in with his bag and immediately moving to examine his patient. He seemed pleased with what he found, though he reiterated his concerns about her malnourishment and dehydration. He prepared a tonic for her to drink, something with a foul smell that made Willa wrinkle her nose, but she swallowed it obediently. "You'll stay here tonight," the doctor said firmly when Willa tried to protest. "And tomorrow as well, I should think. You need rest and proper food. Mrs. Patterson will bring over some broth in the morning and we'll get you built back up." "I can't pay you," Willa said, and Ryder could hear shame in her voice. "Not right now, but I will. As soon as my crops come in, I'll pay every cent I owe." Doc Patterson waved a hand dismissively. "We'll worry about that later. Right now, you focus on getting better." After checking that everything was settled for the night, Doc Patterson headed upstairs to his own quarters, leaving Ryder and Willa alone again. The office was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sounds from the street outside. "You don't have to stay," Willa said softly. "The doctor is here now. I'll be fine." "I know I don't have to, but I told Doc I would sit with you and I keep my word." Ryder settled back in his chair and tipped his hat down over his eyes. "Besides, I'm not much for sleeping in a proper bed anyway. This chair is more comfortable than half the places I have dozed off over the years." He heard her laugh softly, a small breathy sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it pleased him. "You're a strange man, Mr. Nichols, Ryder, and I have been called worse things than strange." She was quiet for a while, and he thought she might have drifted off to sleep, but then her voice came again through the darkness. "Why did you really stay? The truth?" Ryder pushed his hat back and looked at her. The lamp on the desk cast just enough light for him to see her face, pale against the pillow, her eyes watching him intently. He considered lying, giving her some easy answer, but something in her direct gaze made him want to be honest. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "When I saw you lying there on that boardwalk, something in my chest just clenched up. And when I carried you here, I kept thinking about how light you were, how you felt like you might just break. I couldn't stand the thought of you waking up alone and scared. I suppose I wanted to make sure you were going to be all right." "That's very kind of you." "Not kind, just human." Another silence fell between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Ryder found himself thinking about her words earlier, about her homestead claim and her determination to make something of it, despite all the odds stacked against her. He admired that kind of stubbornness, that refusal to give up even when giving up would be the easier path. It reminded him of himself at her age. "How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" Ryder said into the quiet. 23, and you?" 29. Been running my ranch for about 8 years now. You must have started young." "Had to, didn't have much choice in the matter, same as you." He did not elaborate and she did not press, seeming to understand that there were stories he was not ready to tell either. As the night deepened, Willa drifted in and out of sleep, her body fighting to recover from its ordeal. Each time she stirred, Ryder was there, helping her take sips of water, adjusting her pillow, keeping his quiet vigil. He found himself memorizing her features in the lamplight, the curve of her cheek, the way her hair spread across the pillow, the delicate bones of her wrist where her hand lay atop the blanket. He had been alone for a long time by choice. After coming to Wyoming, he had focused every ounce of his energy on building his ranch, on proving that he could make something of himself. There had been no time for courting, no room in his life for thoughts of settling down and starting a family. He had convinced himself he was content with that solitude, that it was what he wanted. But sitting here in the lamplight, watching this brave, stubborn woman fight her way back to health, Ryder felt something shift inside him. It was like a door opening in a room he had kept locked for years, letting in light and possibility and a longing he had not let himself feel before. Sometime after midnight, Willa woke more fully, her eyes clearer than they had been before. "Tell me about your ranch," she said softly. "I'd like to hear about it." So Ryder told her. He described the valley where his land lay, cradled between mountain ranges with a creek running through it that never went dry even in the worst droughts. He told her about his horses, his pride and joy, and how he had built his reputation by breaking and training animals that others had given up on. He explained about the small herd of cattle he ran, not large enough to make him wealthy but sufficient to provide steady income. He talked about his foreman Jack, and the 3 ranch hands who worked for him, good men who had been with him for years. Willa listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she understood more about ranching than he might have expected. Her father, she explained, had been a farmer in Ohio, and she had grown up helping with the animals and the crops. She knew hard work, knew the rhythm of seasons and the demands of the land. "It sounds beautiful," she said when he finished. "Your ranch. It sounds like you built something real." "I did. Took everything I had and then some, but I did it." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You can do the same with your homestead. It won't be easy, but it's possible. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Wanting something badly enough is half the battle." As dawn began to lighten the sky outside the window, painting it in shades of pink and gold, Doc Patterson came downstairs and shooed Ryder out so he could examine his patient properly. Ryder stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool morning air and feeling the exhaustion of the sleepless night beginning to catch up with him. His eyes felt gritty, and his back ached from the chair, but he felt oddly energized at the same time. The doctor emerged a few minutes later, looking pleased. "Her fever has broken completely, and her color is much improved. You did well, sitting with her through the night. I think having someone there helped her feel safe enough to truly rest. She's going to be all right then. With proper care and nutrition, yes. She'll need to stay here today, but tomorrow she should be well enough to leave. Though what she's going back to concerns me greatly. That homestead situation is untenable." "I've been thinking about that," Ryder said slowly, an idea forming even as he spoke. "I could use some help at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, has been wanting to visit her daughter in California. If Miss Kane would be willing to help around the house and with the cooking for the hands, I could pay her a fair wage. It would give her a chance to build up her strength and her savings before she tries to tackle that homestead again." Doc Patterson's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "That's quite an offer, Ryder. Are you sure you have thought it through? Having an unmarried woman living at your ranch could start talk. Let them talk. Miss Kane needs help, and I'm in a position to offer it. The bunkhouse is separate from the main house, and Jack and the boys will serve as chaperones plenty. There's nothing improper about offering honest work for honest pay. You're a good man." Doc Patterson clapped him on the shoulder. "Go home and get some rest. Come back this evening and you can discuss it with Miss Kane. Though I suspect she's as stubborn as you are and might not take kindly to what she sees as charity." Ryder nodded and headed down the street to where he had left his wagon the day before, still loaded with the supplies he had been about to take home. As he drove out of town and along the familiar road to his ranch, he thought about Willa Kane and the way she had looked at him in the lamplight, the way she had listened to his stories about the ranch. He thought about her determination and her pride, and he wondered if she would accept his offer or if her stubborn independence would make her refuse. At the ranch, Jack met him at the barn, looking relieved. "Was starting to worry, boss. You didn't come back last night. Had to help someone." "Everything go all right here," smooth as silk. "Got that fence in the north pasture mended, and I checked on that mare you were worried about. She's doing fine, false alarm." Ryder nodded his thanks and spent the next few hours attending to the most pressing ranch business, but his mind kept drifting back to town, to the doctor's office, to Willa. Finally, he gave up pretending he could concentrate and told Jack he was going to catch a few hours of sleep. Instead, he found himself pacing his small house, looking at it with new eyes. It was a simple place, 2 bedrooms and a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, with a washroom off the back. He had built it himself with Jack's help 5 years ago, when his circumstances had improved enough to warrant something better than the one-room cabin he had been living in. It was clean but sparse, furnished with only the basics because he had never seen the point of anything more. Now, looking at it, he wondered what a woman would think of it. Would Willa find it too rough, too masculine? He shook his head at himself. What did it matter what she thought of his house? She would be working here, that was all, earning money to help her make a go of her own place. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Except he knew, even as he tried to convince himself, that it was already more than that. It had become more the moment he had lifted her into his arms and felt that fierce, protective instinct kick in, stronger than anything he had experienced before. That evening, after forcing himself to sleep for a few hours and then completing his ranch duties, Ryder washed up and changed into a clean shirt before heading back to town. He found Willa sitting up in bed, looking worlds better than she had the night before. Doc Patterson's wife had brought over some of her own dresses for Willa to wear since her calico had been ruined with flour and dust, and the borrowed blue cotton brought out the green in Willa's eyes. "You're looking much improved," Ryder said from the doorway. A smile crossed her face when she saw him, genuine and warm. "I feel human again. Doc says I can leave tomorrow. I'll need to walk back to my place, but I'm sure I can manage it. About that, I wanted to talk to you about something." Ryder pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy. "I have a proposition for you. A job offer, actually." Willa's smile faded, replaced by wariness. "What kind of job?" He explained his idea, carefully emphasizing that this was a legitimate offer born of genuine need, not charity or pity. He told her about Mrs. Chen wanting to visit her daughter, about how the ranch hands had been making do with their own cooking, and it was starting to affect morale. He explained that she would have one of the bedrooms in the main house, that the bunkhouse where the men slept was a good 50 yards away, that everything would be completely proper and respectable. The pay would be $30 a month plus room and board, he concluded. It would give you a chance to recover your strength and save up money. And if you wanted, I could have Jack and the boys help you with your cabin on their days off, get it properly built, so you have something solid to go back to when you're ready. Willa stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "And please don't tell me it's just because you need a housekeeper. You could hire any number of women in town for that." Ryder met her gaze steadily. "You're right, I could. But the truth is, I want to help you. I saw you lying there yesterday, and something in me couldn't stand the thought of you going back to that lean-to, trying to survive on your own with no resources and no help. Maybe I see something of myself in you, that determination to make it no matter what the cost. Or maybe I just think you deserve a fair chance, and right now, life hasn't given you one. Will you let me help?" Tears welled in Willa's eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. "I'll pay you back. Every cent. I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's a job. You'll work hard for that money, I promise you that. Cooking for ranch hands is no easy task." She laughed through her tears. "When can I start?" "Day after tomorrow. Give yourself one more day to recover, and then I'll come fetch you." Over the next 3 months, Willa became an integral part of life at the Nichols Ranch in a way that surprised everyone, Ryder most of all. She threw herself into her work with the same fierce determination she had brought to her homesteading attempt, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men and not stopping until the supper dishes were washed and put away each night. But she was not just a housekeeper. Within the first week, she had reorganized Ryder's chaotic kitchen, finding efficiencies he had never thought to look for. She planted a vegetable garden behind the house, using seeds she had salvaged from her homestead, and soon they had fresh produce to supplement their meals. She mended the men's clothes without being asked, and she doctored a ranch hand's infected cut with poultices her mother had taught her to make, probably saving him from a serious illness. The men adored her. Jack, who was 50 if he was a day and had been a bachelor his entire life, took to calling her Miss Willa with a respect that bordered on reverence. The three younger hands, Tom, Frank, and Billy, competed for her attention like puppies, each trying to be the first to bring her firewood or to carry heavy items for her, and Ryder found himself falling in love. It happened gradually, in small moments that accumulated like snow building to an avalanche. The way she hummed while she worked in the kitchen, old songs from Ohio that reminded her of home. The way she laughed at Jack's terrible jokes, genuine amusement lighting up her whole face. The way she sat on the porch after supper sometimes, watching the sun set over the mountains with an expression of such contentment that it made his chest ache. They fell into a pattern of spending evenings together after the work was done, and the men had retired to the bunkhouse. Ryder would bring his ranch ledgers to the kitchen table and work on his accounts while Willa mended clothes or prepared food for the next day, and they would talk. Sometimes about nothing much, the small details of their days. Other times about deeper things, their hopes and fears, their pasts and the paths that had led them to Wyoming. He learned that her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to keep house for her father and two older brothers. The brothers had both been killed in the same factory accident when Willa was 19, a tragedy that had broken her father's spirit. He had lived 4 more years, but Willa said he had never really recovered from losing his sons. When he finally passed, it had almost been a relief, knowing he was at peace at last. She learned about Ryder's childhood in Texas, about a father who drank and a mother who had died trying to give birth to what would have been his little sister. She learned about how he had left home at 17 with his father's curses following him, determined to make something of himself where his father had failed. She learned about the lean years, the times when he had not been sure he would make it, and the slow, hard-won success that had finally come. They talked about books they had read, about places they hoped to see someday, about what it meant to belong somewhere. They debated politics and religion, sometimes agreeing and sometimes not, but always with respect for each other's views. They discussed ranching and farming, and Ryder found himself impressed by Willa's knowledge and instincts. She might have been new to the Wyoming territory, but she understood the land in a way that came from growing up close to it. One evening in late October, after the first frost had painted the world silver, Ryder found himself watching Willa more intently than usual. She was darning one of Frank's socks, her head bent over her work, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The lamplight caught auburn highlights in her hair, and he could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose that had deepened over the summer months as she worked in the garden. "Willa," he said, and something in his tone made her look up, her hands stilling. "Yes, I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen all the way through before you respond. Can you do that?" Concern flickered across her face, but she nodded, setting aside her mending and giving him her full attention. Ryder took a deep breath, suddenly more nervous than he had ever been facing down an angry bull or a spooked horse. "These past months, having you here, they've been the best of my life. I wake up in the morning looking forward to seeing you at the breakfast table. I find myself making excuses to come back to the house during the day just to hear your voice. And every night when I go to bed, My last thought is of you." He saw her eyes widen, but she stayed silent, honoring his request to let him finish. "I know you came here to work, to earn money so you could go back to your homestead and make a go of it on your own. And if that's still what you want, I'll help you do it. I'll keep my promise, and Jack and the boys will build you the finest cabin in the territory. But before you go, I need you to know that I've fallen in love with you, completely, irrevocably. And if there's any chance you might feel the same way, I'd like to ask you to stay, not as my housekeeper, as my wife." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Willa stared at him, her eyes bright with emotion, her lips slightly parted. Then, slowly, she stood up and crossed the small distance between them. She took his face in her hands, and her touch was gentle but sure. "Ryder Nichols," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I fell in love with you the night you sat beside my bed and told me stories about your ranch. I fell in love with your kindness and your strength, and the way you looked at me like I was worth something. I have been trying so hard not to let myself hope that you might feel the same way, because I was terrified of the disappointment if you didn't. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stay." He stood then, pulling her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. She melted against him, her arms winding around his neck, and for a long moment, the world contracted to just the two of them, to the warmth of her body against his and the taste of her lips and the feeling of rightness that settled deep in his bones. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers and laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. "I was so scared you'd say no. I was so scared you'd never ask." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in Cody's church, with Doc Patterson and his wife standing as witnesses and most of the town turning out to celebrate. Willa wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew from yards of cream-colored silk that Ryder had insisted on buying her from the finest goods Henderson's store had to offer. Ryder wore his Sunday best, a suit he had purchased years ago and rarely had occasion to wear. Jack served as Ryder's best man, gruff and uncomfortable in his own best clothes, but when he shook Ryder's hand after the ceremony, there were tears in the old cowboy's eyes. "You chose well, boss," he said. "She's 1 in a million." "I know," Ryder replied, watching his new wife laugh with Mrs. Patterson across the room. "Believe me, I know." The reception was held at the hotel, and the whole town seemed to be crammed into the dining room, eating cake and drinking punch and offering their congratulations. Willa glowed with happiness, and Ryder kept finding excuses to touch her, to rest his hand at the small of her back, or to take her hand in his, still marveling that she was his wife. That night, back at the ranch, Ryder carried Willa over the threshold of what was now their home together, both of them laughing as he nearly bumped her head on the doorframe. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by something deeper and more intense. "Hello, husband," Willa said softly, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. "Hello, wife." Ryder covered her hands with his own, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath their joined fingers. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought I could be. When I came to Wyoming, I thought I was looking for land and independence. I didn't know I was looking for you. I didn't know I was looking for anything until I found you." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that felt sacred in its intimacy. Ryder had been with women before, quick encounters that had satisfied physical needs but left him feeling empty afterward. This was different. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word felt like a promise, a claiming that went soul deep. When Willa cried out his name at the height of her pleasure, he felt something in his chest crack open, a last wall coming down that he had not even known he had built. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed that was now their bed, her head pillowed on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. Through the window, he could see stars scattered across the night sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Tell me about tomorrow," Willa murmured, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "Tell me what our life is going to be like." So Ryder painted her a picture with words. He told her about the seasons on the ranch, the way spring came late but fierce, bringing new life. He described summer roundups and fall cattle drives. He talked about winters when the snow piled high, and they would be snowed in for days at a time, just the two of them and the work to keep the animals fed and healthy. He spoke of building their future together, of children that might come and the legacy they would leave. Willa listened, occasionally asking questions or adding her own thoughts, and gradually, they both drifted toward sleep. Just before Ryder slipped under, Willa spoke one more time, her voice drowsy and content. "Thank you for carrying me that day. Thank you for not leaving me alone. Thank you for collapsing where I could find you," Ryder replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for saying yes." The years that followed were not without their challenges, but they faced everything together. The first spring, Ryder made good on his promise, and they went to Willa's homestead claim. She released it back to the territorial office, acknowledging that she no longer needed it now that she had a home with Ryder. But they salvaged what they could from her small garden, transplanting some of the hardier plants to the ranch and saving the seeds for planting. That same spring, they learned that Willa was pregnant with their first child. She glowed with health throughout her pregnancy, finally able to eat well and rest properly. And when she delivered a healthy baby boy in the dead of winter, Ryder held his son in his arms and wept. They named him James, after Willa's father, and the boy had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. 2 years later, a daughter joined them, a tiny, fierce little thing they named Rose, who seemed determined from birth to explore every corner of the ranch. She was walking before she was 10 months old, running soon after that, and gave them more gray hairs before she was 3 than they had thought possible. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Willa's organizational skills and Ryder's ranching expertise proved to be a formidable combination. They expanded their horse operation, and Ryder's reputation as a horse breaker grew throughout the territory. They added more cattle to their herd and improved their breeding stock. They built a larger house, one with room for their growing family and a separate room for the books that both of them loved to read. Jack remained with them until his death at age 68, a peaceful passing in his sleep that left them all grieving. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley, where he could watch over the ranch he had helped build. Frank and Billy married local girls and started their own ranches nearby, remaining close friends and occasional business partners. Tom moved on after a few years, heading farther west in search of his own dreams, but he wrote occasionally with news of his adventures. In 1889, when Wyoming achieved statehood, Ryder and Willa traveled to the territorial capital with James and Rose to witness the celebration. Standing in the crowd, watching the new state flag rise against the blue sky, Willa took Ryder's hand and squeezed it tight. "We've witnessed history," she said softly. "We've made history," Ryder corrected, looking down at their children. "Every day we're here, building our lives and raising our family, we're making history. This land, this state, it's built on people like us." Willa nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for saving my life that day." "You thank me every day," Ryder said, wrapping his arm around her. "Every morning I wake up next to you, every meal we share, every moment we spend together. That's thanks enough." By the time they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, the ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. They had added 2 more children to their family, another boy named Thomas and a second daughter, Margaret. The 4 Nichols children were the joy of their parents' lives, wild and free in the way of ranch children, capable and confident. The original homestead that Willa had tried to claim had been taken up by a family from Kansas, and Ryder and Willa had helped the new settlers get established, remembering what it had been like to struggle alone. It became something of a tradition, the Nichols family helping new homesteaders when they arrived in the area, offering advice and sometimes material assistance to help them get through the first brutal year. On their anniversary, Ryder took Willa back into Cody, back to Doc Patterson's office where their story had truly begun. The old doctor had passed away 2 years earlier, and his practice had been taken over by a younger man from Boston, but the building was the same. They stood outside and looked up at it, hands clasped. "You ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had found me that day?" Willa asked. "If you had been just a few minutes later, or if you hadn't been in town at all?" "I try not to think about it," Ryder admitted. "The idea of a world where I never met you, where we never had this life together, it's unbearable." "I collapsed right there." Willa pointed to the spot on the boardwalk in front of what was now a dress shop instead of Henderson's general store. "I remember the heat, the way the world just tilted sideways and went dark. And then I woke up and you were there, and even though I didn't know you, somehow I felt safe." "You were so light when I picked you up," Ryder said, remembering. "So fragile. And so damn stubborn when you woke up, worried about that spilled flour." Willa laughed. "You did replace that flour, even though I told you not to. Couldn't let my future wife go without baking supplies, could I?" They walked down the street hand in hand, noting the changes that a decade had brought. Cody had grown, new buildings rising where empty lots had once stood. The town had electric lights now, a wonder that still amazed Ryder even though he had seen them installed. There was talk of a railroad spur coming through, which would make shipping cattle and horses much easier. But despite all the changes, the mountains still stood eternal beyond the town, and the sky was still that endless Wyoming blue. And when Ryder looked at his wife, he saw the same woman he had fallen in love with, only deeper now, richer. Their connection forged and reforged through years of shared joys and sorrows. That night, at a dance held in the hotel to celebrate their anniversary, the whole town turned out. Ryder led Willa onto the dance floor, and as they moved together to the music, she smiled up at him with such love that it took his breath away. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every struggle, every hardship, every moment of fear and doubt, I would do it all again to end up here with you." "So would I," Ryder replied, pulling her closer, "though maybe with a few modifications. I could have done without the time that Bull charged me, or when Rose got stuck in that tree and we thought we'd have to call the fire brigade." Willa laughed, the sound bright and free. "Our life has certainly been interesting. Interesting is one word for it. Wonderful is another." As the years continued to pass, Ryder and Willa's love only deepened. They weathered droughts and harsh winters. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They watched their children grow and start families of their own. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Ryder grew older, proving himself a worthy successor with his father's skills and his mother's intelligence. Rose married a teacher from back east and moved to Cheyenne, where she became a prominent advocate for women's education. Thomas became a veterinarian, the first in the county, and made his parents proud with his dedication to caring for animals. Margaret, the youngest and wildest, surprised everyone by becoming a writer, penning stories about the West that earned her recognition throughout the country. In 1910, on a warm summer evening, Ryder and Willa sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set behind the mountains. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray and their faces lined with the evidence of lives well lived. But when Ryder looked at Willa, he still saw the beautiful, determined young woman who had stolen his heart. "You have any regrets?" Willa asked, taking his hand in hers. Ryder thought about it seriously before answering. "Only that I didn't find you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had." "We have had 27 years, Willa pointed out. "That's more than many people get. Not enough. Will never be enough." Ryder raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "But I'll take every moment I'm given and be grateful for them." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, the sound of young voices raised in laughter carrying clearly in the evening air. James and his wife had 3 children now, and they lived in a house they had built on the northern edge of the ranch property. Rose visited with her 2 boys whenever she could get away from Cheyenne. Thomas, still unmarried at 32, lived in the town but came out to the ranch nearly every day. "We've built something that will last," Willa said, echoing Ryder's thoughts. "Not just the ranch, but a family, a legacy. Our grandchildren will tell their children about us, and we'll live on through them." "You'll live on through them," Ryder corrected. "I'm just the stubborn cowboy who got lucky enough to carry you to the doctor that day. You're so much more than that, and you know it." They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Ryder thought about that August day in 1883, about the twist of fate that had put him in the right place at the right time. He thought about the terror he had felt when Willa collapsed, the fierce protectiveness that had driven him to stay all night by her bedside. He thought about every choice they had made since then, every fork in the road where they could have gone a different way but had chosen instead to walk together. "I love you," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he had spoken them. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Willa replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for carrying me, Ryder, not just that day but every day since. Through all of it, you've carried me." "We've carried each other," Ryder said, wrapping his arm around her. "That's what love is. That's what marriage is. Sharing the load, making it lighter." As the night deepened around them and the ranch settled into sleep, Ryder closed his eyes and sent up a prayer of gratitude to whatever power had guided him that day. He had set out from town with nothing more on his mind than supplies and ranch business, and he had ended up finding the greatest treasure of his life. The years continued to roll by, marked by the unchanging rhythm of ranching life and the ever-changing dynamics of a growing family. In 1918, when the world was still reeling from the Great War, Margaret's first book was published to significant acclaim, a collection of stories about women in the West that drew on her mother's experiences and those of other pioneering women she had interviewed. She dedicated the book to Willa, writing in the foreword, "For my mother, who taught me that true strength lies not in never falling, but in always getting back up." Willa cried when she read it, not tears of sadness but of joy and pride. Her youngest daughter had taken their family's story, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped them, and transformed them into something that would inspire others. It felt like a fitting testament to everything they had built. That same year, Ryder and Willa celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days, with children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filling the house and grounds with noise and laughter. There were 3 generations of Nichols present, all of them products of the love story that had begun on a dusty street in Cody so many years before. During the party, James stood up to make a toast. He had his father's commanding presence and his mother's way with words, and when he spoke, everyone fell silent to listen. 35 years ago, he began, my father made a choice that changed all of our lives. He could have walked past a stranger in need. He could have let someone else deal with the woman who had collapsed on the boardwalk, but that wasn't who he was. He stopped. He helped. He stayed. And in doing so, he found the great love of his life and gave us all a mother who has been the heart of this family and this ranch. James turned to his parents, his eyes bright with emotion. You've shown us what it means to love truly and deeply, to commit to another person through all the challenges life throws at you. You've built something beautiful here, not just in terms of land and livestock, but in terms of family and legacy. We all owe who we are to the two of you and the example you've set. So here's to 35 years and to many more to come. The whole family raised their glasses, voices joining in a chorus of hear, hear. And Ryder felt Willa's hand tighten in his. They looked at each other, and in her eyes, he saw reflected all the love and gratitude he felt in his own heart. Later that night, after the party had wound down and most of the family had retired to various bedrooms or the bunkhouse where some of the younger grandchildren had insisted on sleeping, Ryder and Willa took a walk under the stars. It was something they had done countless times over the years, but it never grew old. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the mountains. 35 years, Willa said wonderingly. Where did they go? Into all of this, Ryder gestured at the ranch spread around them, the buildings and corrals and pastures they had built together. Into our children and our grandchildren, into every sunrise we've watched together and every storm we've weathered side by side. They walked to the creek that ran through the property, the same creek Ryder had described to Willa on that long-ago night when she had lain recovering in Doc Patterson's office. The water caught the moonlight, turning it to silver as it burbled over smooth stones. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" Willa asked. "When I was so sick and you were trying to keep me awake and aware, you told me about this creek, about how it never ran dry. You made it sound like paradise." "It is paradise," Ryder said. "Not because of the water or the land, but because you're here with me." They stood by the creek for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds and feeling the peace that comes from a life well lived and love well nurtured. Eventually, they made their way back to the house, walking slowly, reluctant to end this perfect night in bed. Willa curled against Ryder's side in the way that had become second nature over decades of sleeping together. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. Promise me that when one of us goes, the other won't give up, won't stop living. Our love is strong enough to endure even that separation, and whoever is left behind needs to keep going, for our children and grandchildren if not for themselves." Ryder's throat tightened, but he forced himself to answer. "I promise, though the thought of losing you is more than I can bear. And I can't imagine life without you, but we've been blessed with so many years together, Ryder, more than we had any right to expect. When the time comes, we need to be grateful for what we had rather than bitter about what we're losing. When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just finally noticed." He could hear the smile in her voice, and it eased the tightness in his chest. They drifted off to sleep together, secure in each other's presence and in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they had built something unshakable. The seasons turned, bringing them into the 1920s. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, though Ryder remained active in the operations well into his 60s, unable to fully step away from the work that had defined so much of his life. Willa remained the heart of the family, the one everyone came to with their problems and their joys, the grandmother who always had cookies in the jar and wisdom to share. In 1923, on a crisp October morning, Ryder woke to find Willa already up and standing by the window, looking out at the golden autumn landscape. He watched her for a moment, admiring the way the morning light caught in her silver hair and outlined her still graceful figure. She was 70 now, and he was 76, but when he looked at her, he saw every age she had ever been, all of them overlaid like pages in a book. "Come back to bed," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "It's early yet." She turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip a beat even after all these years. "I was just thinking about that day," she said. "The day we met. It was this same time of year, early autumn, though not quite as late in the season." "August," Ryder confirmed. "August of 1883. 40 years ago, 40 years. Willa crossed back to the bed and sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "What a journey it's been. The best journey of my life." Ryder pulled her down for a kiss, slow and sweet and full of tenderness. Every mile of it. They spent the morning together, just the two of them, walking the ranch and reminiscing about all the changes they had seen and all the memories they had made. Ryder showed her the spot where they had broken ground for the new barn in 1895, and Willa pointed out the tree where Thomas had broken his arm falling from a branch when he was 8. They visited the hill where Jack was buried and stood in silence for a moment, honoring the memory of their dear friend. As the sun climbed higher, they made their way back to the house, where Willa insisted on cooking Ryder's favorite meal for lunch. He tried to help, but she shooed him out of the kitchen, and he ended up sitting at the table, watching her move around the room with the easy competence of long practice. This kitchen had been her domain for 4 decades, and she knew every inch of it. After they ate, they sat on the porch together, a habit they had developed over the years, and one that brought them both peace. James stopped by with news about the cattle market, and they spent an hour discussing ranch business, but eventually he left them alone again, sensing that his parents wanted privacy. "I'm tired," Willa said as the afternoon light began to slant toward evening. "I think I'll go lie down for a bit." "Want me to come with you?" She shook her head, reaching out to touch his face gently. "You stay here and enjoy the sunshine. I'll just be an hour or so." Ryder watched her go inside, then settled back in his chair and closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the sun soak into his bones. He must have dozed off, because when he opened his eyes again, the sun was much lower in the sky and the air had taken on the cool edge of evening. He went inside to check on Willa and found her lying on their bed, her hands folded peacefully on her chest. For a moment, he thought she was still asleep, but then he noticed the absolute stillness, the absence of the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. He knew, even before he crossed the room and touched her hand, that she was gone. She had passed peacefully in her sleep, without pain or struggle, slipping away as gently as falling asleep. It was, Ryder thought through the crushing weight of his grief, exactly how she would have wanted to go. But that knowledge did nothing to ease the agony of loss that tore through him. He sat beside her on the bed and took her hand in his, and he wept. He wept for the years they would not have together, for the sunsets she would not see and the grandchildren she would not watch grow. He wept for himself, for the loneliness that stretched ahead of him like an endless road. But most of all, he wept because he had lost his best friend, his partner, the other half of his soul. The family gathered for the funeral, and half the county turned out to pay their respects. Willa had touched countless lives over her 4 decades in Wyoming, and the testimonials about her kindness, her strength, and her generosity seemed endless. They buried her on the hill beside Jack, overlooking the valley she had loved, and Ryder stood by her grave long after everyone else had left, unable to make himself walk away. In the weeks that followed, Ryder moved through his days like a man in a dream. He ate because his family insisted, and he helped with ranch work because his hands needed something to do, but nothing felt real anymore. The house was too quiet without Willa's humming, too empty without her presence. He found himself talking to her sometimes, telling her about his day as though she were still there to listen. But he had made her a promise, and Ryder Nichols had never broken a promise in his life. So he kept going. He got up each morning and put one foot in front of the other. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, finding comfort in their love and in the parts of Willa he could see in each of them. He walked the ranch and tended to the horses, finding solace in the work that had always grounded him. One evening, about 2 months after Willa's death, Margaret came to visit. She found her father on the porch, sitting in his usual chair with Willa's empty chair beside him. "Dad," she said softly, sitting down on the steps at his feet, "how are you really doing?" Ryder considered the question seriously before answering. "I'm surviving," he said finally. "Some days are better than others. I miss her so much it feels like a physical wound, but I'm keeping my promise to her. I'm still here, still living. She would be proud of you. I hope so." Ryder reached out and touched Willa's empty chair, his fingers tracing the worn armrest. "You know, your mother saved my life just as surely as I saved hers that day. Before I met her, I was just going through the motions, building the ranch but not really living. She taught me what it meant to truly live, to love fully and deeply. She gave me purpose beyond just survival." Margaret took her father's hand, squeezing it tight. "You gave that to each other. That's what made your love so special. It wasn't one-sided. You built a life together, supported each other, made each other better." Ryder nodded, feeling tears sting his eyes. "I would do it all again, you know. Even knowing how much it would hurt to lose her, I would do it all again. The years I had with your mother were worth any price." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ryder found himself thinking about that August day so long ago, about the moment when he had looked across the street and seen Willa fallen on the boardwalk. In that instant, his entire life had changed, though he had not known it yet. One decision, one act of kindness had led to 40 years of love and partnership, and a family that would carry on long after he was gone. Ryder lived for 5 more years after Willa's death, years filled with both sorrow and unexpected joy. He watched his great-grandchildren grow. He saw Margaret's second book achieve even greater success than her first. He witnessed Thomas finally marry a lovely young veterinarian who had come to work with him. And through it all, he carried Willa with him, not as a burden of grief, but as a presence that never truly left. On a warm spring morning in 1928, Ryder Nichols passed away in his sleep at the age of 81. His children found him in his bed, peaceful and still, his hand stretched out toward the empty space where Willa had slept for so many years. They buried him beside her on the hill, reuniting them at last, and the whole county mourned the loss of a man who had been a pillar of their community for nearly half a century. Years later, when Margaret finally published her autobiography, she included a chapter about her parents' love story. She wrote about how it had begun with an act of compassion, how it had grown through years of partnership and mutual respect, and how it had endured even death itself. She described her father sitting on the porch after her mother's death, talking to the empty chair beside him as though Willa were still there. And she concluded with these words, "My parents taught me that true love is not something that happens to you, but something you choose every day." They chose each other on that long ago August afternoon when my father carried my mother to safety. and they continued choosing each other through 40 years of marriage and 5 years of separation by death. Their love built a ranch, raised a family, and created a legacy that touches dozens of lives even now. And though they are both gone, their story remains, a testament to the transformative power of love and the simple act of caring for a stranger in need. The Nichols Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family that Ryder and Willa had created. Their great-great-grandchildren walked the same land they had walked, rode horses descended from the ones Ryder had trained, and told stories about the legendary love affair that had started it all. The hill where they were buried became a family landmark, a place where Nichols' descendants came to remember, and to honor the couple whose choice to love had shaped all their lives. And on summer evenings, when the light slants golden across the valley, and the mountains turn purple in the distance, some say you can still see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, side by side in rocking chairs, watching the sunset together just as they always did. Whether it is memory or something more, no one can say for certain. But the love that Ryder and Willa Nichols shared was strong enough to build an empire and endure beyond death itself. And perhaps it is strong enough to leave an echo in the land they loved. A reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stop when someone falls, reach down a helping hand, and stay through the long night until the dawn comes. Their story began with a woman collapsed outside a general store, a cowboy who carried her to the doctor, and a long night of vigil that turned into a lifetime of love. It was a simple beginning to an extraordinary love story, proof that the greatest romances do not always start with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but sometimes with a single act of human kindness that opens the door to something neither person expected but both desperately needed. In the end, that is what love truly is, a choice to care, to stay, to build something together despite all the obstacles and uncertainties. Ryder and Willa Nichols made that choice in 1883, and they continued making it every day until death parted them. And because they chose love, they left behind not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a story that would inspire generations to come. A reminder that real love is worth any price, and that sometimes saving someone else's life means finding your own.